Talk about crazy buff card here, Paladin Legendary. It's maybe a little disappointing. Let's talk about it.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Up first, let's start with Gift of Luminance. Just revealed new card here for Paladin and Priest. The PP dual class situation. It's 3 mana, and it gives a minion Divine Shield, and then it summons a 1/1 copy of that minion. And I think this is a really cool, flexible buff card. Because, first off, it's got some tempo advantages. If you have initiative and you're attacking on board, that Divine Shield can help you trade pretty nicely. And then it's got this huge copy upside, where if you're summoning a copy of things, you can do crazy things like load up a minion with a bunch of Librams that are 0 mana, get your Libram of Wisdoms on there, summon a copy of it, and suddenly you have double the Librams in hand because you've now got 2 minions on board stacking up all those Librams, which even like before Lady Liadrin is going to allow you to really accelerate how quickly you're dumping stats into play via those Librams, taking positive trades, etc. Not to mention this also comes back in hand with Lady Liadrin later. Not that you necessarily need it as much, but it's a possibility. So pretty cool Libram support card that's not immediately a Libram, but can still really help you, I think, in the mid-game shift that Libram deck into that really aggressive buff play a little bit sooner than it otherwise might be able to, because you're usually limited to only 2 Librams. This could push you to 4, even 8, theoretically, if you start stacking these as well. Beyond that, we've got synergies with any kind of positive effect card. So think about things like Death Rattle minions, say Convincing Infiltrator and Priest. You probably don't care if it's a 1/1. A 1/1 with Divine Shield in particular is a little bit frustrating for your opponents to deal with. You're making your normal Convincing Infiltrator a little bit stickier, and you still get to reap twice the reward off of those Death Rattles, so 2 minion deaths instead of a single one. I also think this has some pretty cool synergies with Spell Burst, as all sort of cheap Buffy style spells do, but you can proc that first Spell Burst for this one, get an additional copy of that Spell Burst minion on board. If you have another cheap spell to follow it up, which I think both Priest and Paladin will often have, then you get another Spell Burst activation on something potentially really powerful like Headmaster kel'thuzad or whatever else you might be running. So a handful of different ways to use this card pretty successfully. I think it's going to be strongest in the mid game. I think it's great if you're playing it from a little bit ahead on board, which really I found out that pure Libram Paladin can do right now, and Priest can sometimes do as well, getting some of those high health sticky minions out that are survivable in the early game, some of the tempo Priest playstyle. So both these classes can do that, but also I think it's probably okay if you're playing it from a little bit behind in the mid game as well, just because both of these classes have minions that are defensive, can create problems on future turns, can help you swing really hard off the value of these Divine Shields. I mean, I think there will be some natural comparisons to a card like Psyche Split, where you get to keep the full stat line, and you might say like, hey, if I'm copying 8/8s, I'd rather have Psyche Split to get all those stats in play. But the Divine Shield's kind of like doubling your stats anyway in a lot of ways if it's taking trades on board. And the 1/1 copy can still be great. It can be a problematic little card, especially if it has any kind of effect. And Gift of Luminance, of course, is way cheaper than Psyche Split as well, so much easier to slot into turns, play with your Sethic Veil Weavers, so on and so forth. So to me, a little bit different in its operations, but I think a card with a lot more upside and flexibility than Psyche Split, which is already a pretty solid card right now. So Gift of Luminance just looks really, really good to me. Let's take a look here at Torelli, the Tenured. Cool Warcraft character showing up here. 8 mana, 3/12. Legendary for Paladin with Rush. And whenever this attacks a minion, set the defender's attack and health to 3. So interesting new word usage there with the defenders. Of course, referring to the minion that is being attacked. I think trying to clarify the text there sometimes when we use words like it's a little bit confusing for people, so hopefully that helps. And what that means here is that Torellion's really good at neutralizing big minions on board immediately. You can run this into an 8/8, and it will turn it into a 3/3. Torellion will take only 3 damage, leaving behind a 3/9 on board. So it's kind of like a polymorph style effect connected to a minion that also helps you immediately clear the remainder as well in case there's any onboard effects that you want to resolve. So, theoretically you could use this in something like a control paladin deck to help you answer those big threats. You have things like equality and such in paladin that also reduce stats. even cards like Subdue currently still in standard format. But this one bundles in the actual removal of it immediately so that you don't have to use up some other follow-up to help you resolve it. So it's kind of a 1-card removal instead of 2. You could also use this in something like a dual Paladin deck, where if this gets pulled out of the deck in duel, it's going to win the duel against the opposing minion because it's going to set its attack to 3, presumably based on the way the duel is worded. So those are the theoretical use cases for Torelli. Now, unfortunately, I just don't think that's strong enough. There's a couple things going against this card for me. First off, it's 8 mana, so it's a really slow card. It's going to come down pretty late in the game, and it's only good against a very specific sort of board state or minion, which is a pretty large minion that's not hiding behind a taunt, for instance, because this is relying on its rush aspect. So any small taunt in the way with Titanic lackeys out there in the world is going to disrupt your Torelli. And since he's 8 mana, it's going to be hard to do things like play a weapon to clear the taunt or use some other tool to get through the taunt. So weirdly enough, a single taunt minion can completely shut down this card, which is a gapingly huge weakness as far as I'm concerned, because that's a lot of board states in Hearthstone right now with Shield of Galakrons, Titanic lackeys, various other sorts of random summons and taunts that are in the game. It's really hard to do anything with Torelli against those. Beyond that, any kind of wide board scenario, Torellion's not very good against either. Unlike, say, comparatives like the Batterhead, that's somewhat similar, he's great against wide boards. Torellion's really good against these tall, singular boards. But how often do we see those in Hearthstone where there's just one really big minion out there these days? I feel like that's not something that we're encountering a lot. There are so many different wide board reload sorts of decks out there that Torelli, I think, is going to be really limited in his impact when he's leaving behind 2, 3, 4 minions sometimes. It's going to feel like terrible turns, so he's going to get stuck in hand. You're never going to find that perfect moment to play your Torelli as far as I'm concerned. Even if we do get into future metas where there are more singular large threats, which is always a possibility, it's still just a really big mana commitment, and you only leave behind a 3/9. So if you compare this to an 8-drop removal like Natalie Celine for Priest, that has a couple advantages, right? First off, it's got a higher attack value at base. It can scale even higher in health totals, which we have seen happen many times, because this is really kind of a 3/9 after it takes the trade. Natalie can come down much bigger than 9 health in many instances. She's not limited to taunt by any means. She's not limited to freezing traps or anything like that that demand attacks to actually resolve. So she seems way more flexible and frankly, a bigger threat when deployed. Now, of course, she can't do this multiple times like Torelli. If he does survive on board, he could attack into large threats turn after turn and, theoretically take 4 trades into 3/3s in a really nice, favorable way. But how often does a minion stick around for that long in Hearthstone? If this was able to attack again, like Batterhead when it attacked, yeah, of course, this would be nuts. It'd be crazy. It'd be a way better Batterhead. It would feel very legendary in that regard. But right now, it feels like the worst version of those 2 other 8-drop removals that sort of line up with this one. It just seems like it falls in this gap that's not particularly helpful. It's actually worse kind of in every direction. So I just don't know why you're playing this card in Paladin. I just don't think it makes enough sense for what you need to do. You need bigger, more decisive kinds of removal. You need bigger swing cards on board than just leaving behind a 3/9. And you need things that probably fit a much wider board strategy in Hearthstone these days. So I love the character here. I love these super iconic looking giant legendary cards, but this one is just missing the mark for me. I think this one's going to be rather weak, which is pretty disappointing for such a big, cool character in Warcraft lore. Gift of Luminance is a 4-star card. Torelli, the Tenured, is a 2-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. Only a couple cards, I know. Don't blame me. It's just the weird schedule right now. It's also 10:30 at night for me almost or something. So I'm not happy about it either. But these next few days are going to have a ton of card reveals. So stay tuned for some big reviews in the very near future. We're going to have a lot to talk about. So that said, if you got thoughts on these 2 cards, of course, share them in the comments below. I know a lot of you already shared your thoughts on Torelli in a post I made, a community post here on YouTube. So may not see a lot of thoughts on these, but nonetheless, thanks for hanging out. Let me know what you think of Gift of Luminance. Drop a sub, I guess, if you want to. And until next time, game on.